Hey, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Journey of the Soul. I am really excited that so many of us are gathered together to learn about this very fundamental subject, which is going to teach us a variety of things and hopefully also inspire us in many different ways. You know how it is to go out on a blind date? So there was a guy, Adam, who was going out on a blind date, and he meets this girl who a friend suggested was perfect for him. You know that whole story? And they go out and they're on this date, and Adam was a smart guy. So what he did was he prepared a friend. He asked a friend, please call me an hour into the date, because, hey, you never know how it's going, and this way I'll have a way out. So thank God, an hour into the date, his friend called, and he says, I got to take this call, it's very important. And he runs out for a second, and he comes back with a crestfallen face, and he says, oh my goodness, you won't believe it. My grandfather just passed away. And the girl looks at him and says, thank God. And he looks back at her in complete shock. Like, that's your response? And she says, if your grandfather hadn't died, mine would have had to. So we're here to learn about the journey of the soul and to see it from a Jewish perspective. And what we're going to realize is that the journey of the soul and the way we understand it has a significant impact on the way we experience life itself. And so this is a very relevant course in a practical sense towards passing on and in a practical sense towards living. And I know that there are a whole bunch of reasons why we're here. I know some of us shared that you're here because, something awoke your sense of mortality, and you're thinking about what happens at the end of your time. And I know some of us may have lost a loved one recently, or a dear friend, and we're wondering, where are they? What's going on with them? Do I still have a relationship with them? And I know a lot of us are very intrigued about the afterlife, reincarnation, and those type of spooky, fascinating subjects, which we're going to discuss all of those in this course. And we're going to cover this all and really see how Judaism teaches us to look at all of these situations and every stage that the soul goes through. But before we continue, I just want to mention a few points. The first is to extend a big thank you. We always have someone sponsoring our courses to make sure that we be funded to offer them to the community. So I'd like to extend a big thank you to Roman and Nina Maltz for sponsoring this course. Thank you, Roman and Nina. I want to also thank the volunteers who helped us make sure we can get started on time tonight, coming early and helping out tremendously. When we go through every single lesson, we're going to have different readings. And so what we do is we just move down the row, and when it's your turn, you read the reading that we're up to. When I say, okay, text number 3, read that reading. If you don't want to read, just pass it on to the person next to you. Absolutely no problem. The restrooms are right through this door. You can get up at any time in the class. I will not be insulted. And you can go to the restroom. You can also go through the back doors and swing around the hallway, and you'll find them there as well. Any questions, any objections, any rebuttals, raise your hand. We're a very big class, so I'm going to be very limited on that in this class. However, I will stay here until 10:30 tonight. I will sit down and talk to you for as long as you'd like about any questions that you have, whether it's related or unrelated to the course. So if there are questions that I couldn't get to, please come up and speak with me. There's a recording of every single lesson, which is going to be online. You're going to get an email if you gave it to us and you gave it to us properly, or if our volunteers wrote it down properly. And you'll get an email, and we'll have a link to the audio. We also thank you to Mark Smiler Video, pro bono. He shoots videos of our classes, and they're going to be available. Video takes a longer time to process, but we're going to have them up on RabbiWeinstein.com, so you can find them all there. And please share it all with everyone and anyone you know. Okay? There's no copyright on anything here. The idea is to share the word. If you have a cell phone, at least put it on vibrate, preferably turn it off. I know that I've become a little bit addictive to my cell phone. Not bad enough that when I'm teaching I use it, but usually when I'm listening I use it. And it distracts me from what I'm learning, and I want you to get the most out of the class. So do it for yourself. If you're trying the course, fantastic. If you decide to take the course, which I'm sure you will, then on your way out, please let the volunteers know on your way out, because we're going to be ordering additional textbooks to make sure everyone that registered tonight or in the last few days will have one. If you're trying and you come next week but you didn't let us know, we're not going to be able to have that textbook for you. So please let us know. Is death to be feared? Should we be going through life in fear of death? Or should we embrace it? Should we ignore it? That's always a great option, you know? Let's just make believe it doesn't happen until it does, right? So here's what is very frightening about death. There are many, many things that we go through in life, many frightening experiences that we have. We can have physical pain, we can have emotional pain, we can have broken relationships, we can have financial struggles, deprivation, hunger. There are many things that we can go through in life. Generally, all of those things, many of us had experience with most of those things. And we probably know that those things are sort of like a roller coaster. They sort of go up and down and up and down, you know? So you're doing financially well, it dips, comes back up. Very healthy, having a health issue, up and down, up and down, up and down. But you know, we all know, that death doesn't go up and down. It happens and it's done. Death is final, it is forever. When something is forever, it seems to frighten us because it's done. There's no negotiations. There's nothing that we can do about it anymore. And here is what makes it even more frightening for all of us in the room. We are gifted to be the elite of all creation. We are human beings. And we have, one of the uniquenesses of human beings is that we have self-awareness. We are aware. We can think about. Animals don't have the level of self-awareness and the cognitive thought process to be aware as we do. And that self-awareness that we have makes us aware of the fact that there's something called death that is forever. And that's an anxiety-producing thought. At least for me it is. And that is why death is such a major fear for most people. What does Judaism say about that? And should we be living in fear? Maybe that's a good thing. Some people like to always instill fear in people. Some leaders always lead with fear. They love fear because that's the way they control people. It's God's way of controlling us. So there were 3 social psychologists who came up with something called terror management theory. Okay? And it's a theory about the way human beings deal with death and how much death has an effect on the way we live. So it's extremely relevant. It has a tremendous effect on the way we live. So we're going to read text number 1. And Malad, can we start with you? Read along, everyone. I know not everyone's going to be able to hear necessarily, depending on who's reading. So let's read text number 1. Malad's going to lead the reading. What they've discovered is that we human beings do what we do best. We enter into a state of denial, which is the reason why we go through most of our life feeling immortal, because we ignore it because it's so terrifying to actually deal with it. The reason why terrorism is so powerfully effective is because every time a terrorist strikes, they force us to face our mortality, which we're terrified to do. And therefore, we become terror-stricken. That is exactly why they're so effective in what they do. And so what we're going to be discussing in the next 6 weeks is an intellectual, emotional, spiritual journey as to understanding how Judaism directs us to see death, to deal with death, to understand what's happening when someone dies. Is death what we really think it is? And I'm going to jump right into, and this is a very important point, that, let's see, our awareness of death and our efforts to cope with the resulting fear influence many elements of our psyche and life choices. We need to deal with fear because this fear plays into our life. And so we're going to begin by understanding the way Judaism looks at death. And this may shock you. I'd be surprised if you ever heard this before. But actually, Judaism does not consider death to be the end of life. Judaism considers death to be a new phase of life. It is a new phase of life. Now, I know I have a lot of explaining to do to explain exactly what this means. But when we understand what this means, we will have a different emotional attitude towards death. And it's going to be a much healthier attitude, which will actually not only enhance death, but it's going to enhance life, which is very important. So we first need to understand, well, if death is a new phase of life, we go from the phase of life in this world to the phase of a new phase of life, whatever that phase is. Well, what is life then? Because the way we're using life, it sounds like life is something very different than the way we know it. So we need to identify what is life and who we are really. Who am I really? Who are you really? And some of this you may be familiar with, but I want you to follow along with me because these are the building blocks to everything that we're going to discuss. If you're a philosophical person, and especially if you're of scientific oriented or you like the sciences, and you're trying to figure out who you are, you may say, well, I am an accumulation of cells, or I am a whole bunch of surging chemicals, or I am made up of electrical impulses, whatever it is. Science gives us all different types of words to explain what's going on physiologically in our body. If you're not philosophically oriented, you may be thinking about what you're going to be making for lunch tomorrow. However, regardless, there are moments in our life where events happen where we begin to think about mortality. And we begin to think about who we are. We suddenly, all of the veneer gets shattered, and we start looking deeply within and trying to understand, who was this person that passed away? Who am I? What is a person? What is the real me? And so Jewish mystics, of course, have thoroughly discussed this, and they have stated quite clearly that this cannot be answered through physical observation. Some of you may remember a story I shared in a previous course with a great Hasidic master by the name of Reb Zusha of Anipoli. That's from the easier Hasidic names. Okay? So he was a great Hasidic master, a great mystic, very well known. He lived about 250 years ago. Reb Zusha of Anipoli, I'm not going to test you on the name. And his students once came into his home, and they see him walking up and down in his dining room, and he's saying, "Where is Zusha? Where is Zusha? Where is Zusha?" And, that's an awfully strange thing to be doing. So they thought maybe he was losing his mind or something, like he's looking for himself. What happens? They say, Rebbe, what's going on? You're here. So he said, don't you know that you're here? So he said, there's going to be a day when I am going to pass away, and my body is going to be lying right here on the floor. And all of you are going to be crying and wailing. But I'm here. Why should anyone be crying or wailing? And in this way, he was bringing out to his students that the fact that he is physically present doesn't necessarily mean that he is here. Because perhaps that is not who he is. There is something deeper, there is a deeper dimension to every single one of us which defines who we are. And what is that? That is what we call in Hebrew our neshama, our soul. That is truly who we are. The body is the package. The soul is our identity. Now you may say, well, Rabbi, I heard this times. I know this, right? Well, if you look at the last 15 choices you made in your life, right? Just see what was making that choice and where was that choice coming from. Was that coming from you or was it coming from your body? And so what I'm suggesting is, we understand this already, we can all use assistance and awareness to be able to more deeply engage with this. Let's read text number 2 on page 3. This is from Rabbi Chaim Vital, who was a great mystic who lived about 400 years ago. And what he's explaining is that I am not a particular body part. I am not even the sum total of all of my body parts. I am not even my intellect, my understanding, my feelings. That is not who I am. I am my soul, which is deeper than all of that. Everything else I mentioned is an expression or a tool of the soul. My thoughts are an expression of my soul. My feelings are an expression of my soul. My body is the tool of my soul. But it is not me. There are many, many ramifications to this simple idea. Or maybe not so simple idea. But there are many ramifications, positive ramifications, once we understand this and how it changes our view of many different things. But what we want to understand for tonight is that point number 1, the real me is my soul, not my body. We need to at least know this intellectually. Okay? We're so body-oriented, it's hard for us to know that in practice. And that takes a lot of time for us to develop. But at least for us to know that there is a soul within me, and that is who I am. Now, there are certain words, the theory of relativity. How many of you heard of the theory of relativity? Okay, great. How many of you can come up here and explain this so that everyone will understand it? Yeah, we have a couple of people, and I believe you. But I believe that there's only a handful of people who can actually explain it, right? Because sure, the theory of relativity, right? So, but do we really understand the theory of relativity? Electricity, right? Like when my kids ask me, how does electricity work? Well, I hope you're not around when I explain that to them, right? So there are many, many words, the Big Bang Theory, right? There are many, many words that we know and we're somewhat familiar with, but we don't really fully understand. And I would say that the soul goes into that category. And it requires an immense amount of study in order to really understand. And even with all of the study, we are inherently, as humans, as physical, limited human beings, challenged in understanding something which is an infinite spiritual entity, because it's coming from a different reality. But there is an extent to which we can understand our soul, and we should. So here's what I'd like to ask you to do. I want to ask the number ones to tell this to the number twos. Question for discussion on page 4. What analogy would you use to describe the body-soul relationship? If you wanted to describe and come up with an analogy to describe to someone the body-soul relationship, what analogy would you use? Like, for example, car and engine. Or body of car and engine. You see where I'm going? Okay, come up with your own. Very good. Here, as I mentioned earlier, we have an inherent challenge with this question, which I think is what you're trying to bring out. And that is, it's sort of like someone who is blind trying to understand colors. To some extent, that is our challenge. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to go to the Torah's description of creation to help us understand the human soul. Okay? So we go to text 3a. Okay, now I want you to pay attention to this, okay? God formed man of soil from the earth and breathed into his nostrils the soul of life. And man became a living being. Let's contrast that with the way God created animals. Text 3b. So here we have how God created animals. He said, let the earth bring forth living beings, and it was so. Okay? Number 2, you have 15 seconds. So no time for chit-chat. 15 seconds. Number 2, tell number 1 what you see is different. The primary difference you see in the way he created man versus the way he created animals. Okay? The primary difference you see. Okay, everyone. Excellent. Can I get one answer from this side of the room? One answer from this side of the room. A difference that you saw. Animal doesn't have a soul. What do you mean about neshama? God blew, and what about animals? They just came out. Okay, one more. Yes. This row is very active tonight. Yes. Excellent. So God was personally much more engaged in the creation of man. Excellent. Okay. Here's what we see as we just heard. What we see is that when God creates man, it says that he first formed him from the earth. So you have a form from the earth. And then you have a second thing, which is that God blows a soul into his nostrils. The animals, God creates them from the earth and they come to life. It's that simple. Okay, and I'm not going to go on this tangent. Animals also have a soul, but it's very different than the way God gave man a soul. Very, very different. What is different is the Torah is very clear in telling us that the soul and the body are two separate entities. In fact, the body was created without the soul. There was a body without the soul. It was only after there was a body that God blew the soul into the body. And that tells us something very important, that the body and soul are not intertwined. They're not dependent on each other. And just as by creation they were separate entities that came together, likewise, when they part ways at what we call death, they are not a single unit at the end. And therefore, the body may die. But that is the body that is dying. And if we are not our body, we are our soul, I've got good news for you. Right? Now, I'm not just playing around and saying, we did this cute thing and now the soul. But we're going to understand how the soul is truly who we are. And that we continue on. We truly do continue on. It's just a different phase of life. You don't have to brush your teeth anymore. No more showers. There are some good sides to it. Okay, but this is really exactly where we're going. Yes? I'm not going to go there because it's a tangent. But it's a much more basic soul, which is a part of its physical, which integrates with its physical being. It was part of its creation as a physical being, also included its having a soul. For example, I don't know if I have a good example, but a computer has hardware and software, right? Right? You're familiar with that. The hardware is the body, the software is the soul. You ever think about that? If you have the hardware and you don't have the software, you ain't going nowhere. But if you have the software and you don't have the hardware, you're also not going anywhere in this physical world. But at least you have a driver. You have something which has power to it. So that's sort of the point. However, when with an animal, it's not two separate entities that are being put together. Where the rider is using, as some people say, the rider and the elephant. Anyone know that analogy? There's the rider and the elephant. So the rider is riding the elephant, which is the way it is by a human. By an elephant, the elephant and the rider are all one thing. Okay, and that's the main point we want to bring out over here. It's very important in understanding that when there is death, it is only the body that's passing away. Let's read text 3c. So here's the point. The point is that the soul existed before the body was created. And the soul continues to exist after the body passes on. What does this teach us? It teaches us that the body and the soul are not created together with the body, does not perish when the body does. The soul does not perish when the body does, and it's not at home in the physical world. This is not its natural habitat, the physical world, because the soul is a spiritual entity. It's put into the body, and this is what we're going to discuss right now, how the soul, how I am a soul. My soul is eternal. Eternal means it preceded my physical life, and it outlives my physical life because it is eternal. And most of its existence does not take place in the physical world. This is just a small part of the soul's experience. Okay? Any burning questions? Yes.
Did God create billions of souls, or is it one big soul divided up into little pieces?
That's a very good question, actually. It's an excellent question. So I'm going to answer you, but we're not going to get carried away with it, okay? And the answer is that God created one single primary soul from which he created numerous other sub-primary souls, and all souls emanate from those primary souls, those sub-primary souls. So it's sort of how you just explained it, okay? Yes?
I heard that the concept of soulmates comes from like souls like breaking up and they come to earth and like one half goes to one person and one half and then you find your soul.
Yes, there is such a concept that's explained in Judaism. Yeah.
So was that soul just sitting there? It didn't go to any. I mean, it was that part of the pre-eternal, but that soul never went to anybody else in Judaism. I mean, one that split up the soul. If you're a soulmate, the concept was that, which is what I don't remember.
After the primary souls are broken down into numerous individual souls, those souls have partners.
And all those souls, like,
Correct.
all of them have partners.
They all have partners.
Do you go to the afterlife with that partner?
So we're going to leave that for now. We're going to discuss that. We're going to discuss it later on in the course. Later on in the course. Okay, I'm taking one more question all the way in the back, and then we're going to move on. Yes. Shh. Yes. Correct. Right. Very good. So we're going to actually see, by way of another reading, incidentally, we're going to see how God actually puts a soul into the womb at conception. So by Adam, because Adam didn't go through conception and pregnancy, right? He was just created man. So that's the way God did it there. But in the future, a soul is put into every moment of that a baby is conceived. Okay? Let's move on now. Okay? So we're taught that there is an antechamber and the palace. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to ask you to join together with your partner or partners, if it's three of you. I want you to read texts 4 and texts 5, and I want you to summarize to each other what they teach us about the soul and death. What does it teach you primarily about the soul? What does it tell you about the soul? So read texts 4 and 5 together. What does it teach us about the soul? What did you learn about the soul? What did you learn about the soul? That what? That the soul what? That the soul, I finished my sentence. That the soul, what did you learn? That the soul what? Does the soul want to come down to earth? Okay. One thing we learned about this. One thing we learned is that we have a soul that didn't want to come down to earth. In case you're rebellious, it started a long time ago. Okay. Right. That's one thing that we learned. Right. Another thing that we learn is, right, in text number 5, the world is like an antechamber before the world to come. Where's the primary place? The world to come. A single moment of bliss in the world to come is greater than all of this world. Now, you may know how to live it up, but all of that living it up in all of the parties that you had, right, all of that is nothing compared to a moment of bliss in the world to come. right? So the soul enjoys being in the other world where it came from and where it goes. That's what the soul really enjoys. That's what these two readings are teaching us. It's not interested in the physical world, it's interested in the spiritual world. Okay? That raises a major question, but give me a moment, okay? Hopefully I'm going to ask your question. What we know right now is, here's what we know right now. We know the real me is my soul, not my body. The real me, the soul, is eternal. It's eternal. It preceded the body. It continues after the body. That means I am eternal. You are eternal. We are all eternal. And lastly, the real eternal me is unaffected by birth and death. What we mean by unaffected by birth and death is that its existence is by birth and death. It continues. Before it's born it was, during our physical experience, its physical experience it is, and it continues on in the next world in a different way. Something we need to learn about, but in a different way. Okay, this is vital for us to understand the soul. This also raises a major question about the soul not wanting to be here. Mike, and then I'm going to jump, Joyce, just a second. Yeah. You want to know if it's going to be reincarnated? Here, the great news, Mike, is that is going to be, I think it's lesson number 4, and that means you got to come back. Okay, we're going to discuss that later on in the course. Yes, Joyce. What's that? Nothing can destroy the soul. Okay? So I'm going to put this out there without going into this subject. I'm just putting it out there because you mentioned it and it's vitally important. Cremation is not what Judaism wants us to do when we pass on. And if that makes you more comfortable, just think about playing with a blowtorch. And I say that jokingly and seriously at the same time. It's not any more pleasant than burial. And we really need to understand that subject very well and how it affects the soul. But it doesn't destroy the soul. Okay, I'm going to move on, and I'm sorry. Okay? So what about life? It sounds as if it's all about the soul before it came down and after it came down. For some reason, it gets dumped here and it's got to put up with life in this physical world. Does Judaism not celebrate life? We know Judaism celebrates life better than almost any other tradition that we know of. And we know there are cultures that celebrate death, and Judaism is definitely not one of them. We do know how to enjoy life. The Torah actually tells us to enjoy life, as long as we're enjoying it in the appropriate manner and for the appropriate reasons. We also know, as you may know, that we will, for the sake of saving a life, violate almost any commandment, because the Torah itself tells us, violate all my commandments in order to preserve life. Even if someone's on their deathbed and the doctor says there's no hope and there is no reasonable, rational way that this person is going to survive, we violate other mitzvot in order to attempt to save this person's life. Even though it's almost, and it's never hopeless, but it's almost hopeless. And every expert doctor says it's hopeless. And let's say that ends up happening, the person does pass away. We still violate almost any mitzvah in order to preserve their life. Because life is paramount, it's even taking precedence over mitzvot, over God's commandments. I mean, that's what God tells us to do. So clearly, in our value system, life takes very, very high priority. And we can see this in text number 6. Let's read text 6. So what this tells us is that there is no greater mitzvah than saving a life, because it supersedes almost every single other mitzvah. So how do we reconcile this value of life while at the same time we just learned that the soul really is not interested in life? And when I'm saying life now, I mean life in this world, in physical life. So here's what we need to realize. that the entire purpose of every single soul is fulfilled in this world. The entire purpose of every single soul is fulfilled in this world, in the physical world. That's why it comes down into the world. The entire purpose that God created a soul is that it should come into a physical body and live in a way that reveals the presence of God in the universe, in a godly manner, in a good manner, and in that way, the soul is living, fulfilling its purpose. But if you ask a soul, just like if you ask a child, what do you want for dinner? You want salad or you want lollipops, right? And so obviously the child wants lollipops, but you don't give the child lollipops for dinner. You're going to give them the salad if you're really lucky, or maybe French fries if you're not so lucky. But whatever it is, it needs to come down into the physical world in order to fulfill its purpose. That is the reason why it was created. Not only is it why it was created, that is the reason for all of creation. Had all of this, if souls would not be coming into bodies and living in the way, fulfilling the mission that God wants us to fulfill in this world, then God would not have created the entire universe. Let's read text number 7. Imagine this. Imagine someone is engaged to the love of their life. And they're preparing the most exquisite wedding in the world, and they get a florist, beautiful flowers, and a 10-piece band, and, alcohol, and the greatest rabbi in the world to officiate, and a videographer, and a photographer, and Smiler video, a limo driver that's going to bring him to and take him home, the whole 9 yards, right? And then, she or he, whoever pulls out, they get cold feet. There's no way I'm going to be able to say I do under this chuppah, right? I just can't. They get cold feet, so they back out, right? Well, all right, they backed out. We can still party, right? What does the person do? They're in devastation. Everything that they arranged is a complete waste. It has no value to them. They're not going to use it. It's actually a nuisance to them, and it's in their way now. And this is the exact same way God created the universe, in that God's created this entire universe, which is like getting the band and the photographer and the videographer and everyone. But the entire purpose is that souls are going to come into bodies, and when they come into bodies, they are going to fulfill their mission in the world. If souls are not coming into the body to fulfill the mission, then we are losing our entire purpose. Does a soul enjoy this? Not necessarily. If it had its choice, it would stay in the bliss of what it knows, which is a realm of spirituality. But this is where its purpose is. This is put out very beautifully in an anecdote with Talmud between a rabbi and his student. One of the greatest rabbis that lived, his name is Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, and he was on his deathbed, and his student saw that he was crying, and the student was actually concerned that his teacher was crying on his deathbed, which sounds shocking to us, right? But from the perspective that his teacher taught him about death, he was surprised. Let's read text number 8. So the student was concerned. Why are you crying? Are you upset that you're passing on? That's not devastating. You lived a wonderful life, and your soul's going to continue now into heaven. And he said, I'm not crying because of the transition that's about to take place. I'm crying because I will no longer be able to continue my mission. Now, his mission was completed. However, he is no longer going to be a part of the human mission, and the Jewish mission in particular, that we bring to the universe. And that he's going to miss, because in heaven, there is no physicality, and therefore we cannot fulfill our mission in the physical world when we are in heaven. And so the soul ends up very conflicted. And you ever feel conflicted? It may be coming from your soul's inherent feeling of confliction. And that's because, on one hand, before it came down, it did not want to come down. And once it was down, it doesn't want to leave, which is really interesting. So it didn't want to come down, and once it's down, it actually doesn't want to leave. Let's read text 9. Well, if against your will you live, then you should love to die, to move back to where you came from. If you embrace life, then you shouldn't reject coming down, and you should reject death. How can you reject being born and reject dying? And the reason why is because the soul enjoys it's just like us. The soul wants to be comfortable. Human beings always want to be comfortable. You ever notice that about yourself? And where does growth always happen? Whenever you make yourself uncomfortable. That's always where growth happens. If you don't know how to push yourself into discomfort, you're not going to do a lot of growing in your life. If you know how to push yourself into discomfort, you're going to grow a lot. Because discomfort is fertile ground for growth. Comfort is fertile ground for stagnation. That is the way it is, and that's the way the soul is. So the soul says, hey, I want to stay in heaven. That's where I'm comfortable. God forces it into the body and says, you have a mission. It comes into the body. Once it's here, it's doing its mission, and it wants to do as much as it can. It doesn't want that mission to be stopped, so it can do as much as it can. And therefore, it also doesn't want to die. It's conflicted. However, once the person passes away and the soul leaves the body, it goes back to a very blissful place, taking us back to what we read earlier, that one moment of bliss in the world to come is greater than all of the pleasure in this world. However, there's another part of that passage which we didn't read earlier in text number 11. Let's read text 11. Okay, what we learned from this is that 1 hour in this world is more important. It's more important than all of the next world. One moment in the next world is more pleasurable than the entire pleasure of this world. You heard the difference there? A moment in this world is more important. A moment in the next world is more pleasurable. So 1 hour in the next world is more pleasurable than all of this one. 1 hour in this world is more important than all of the next. We are at a stage which is relatively brief stage in the existence of our soul, which is when we're on this earth, which we know can sometimes not be very pleasurable and sometimes be extremely painful in many different ways. But our period in this world is very important because what we can accomplish while we're here is tremendous. And it's in particular by the fact that we are uncomfortable, because the discomfort is what brings out that growth of what it is that we need to do. Any burning questions? You want to ask?
So my understanding was that the soul goes to heaven every night to study.
Yes. Yeah. So the soul, when a person is alive, then even when a person is sleeping, which is we go into a state of unconsciousness, so to speak, a very low state of unconsciousness, and that means that our life force is much lower. And in a spiritual sense, that signifies that the soul elevates. Now, there are different dimensions to the soul. So it doesn't mean that the soul literally leaves the body, but it means that the person is only functioning with their base level soul, of their soul. But their higher dimensions are going to heaven. Okay?
I was going to ask, why was the Rebbe so concerned? Because the soul is still studying. It's not, the body's not studying.
Very good, because he can no longer do a mitzvah. He can no longer put a coin in a charity box. He can no longer do a favor for another person. He can no longer listen to the sounding of a shofar, right? Which is the almost the entirety of. But that's what they do. Soul study in, so to speak, whatever that means. But they study in heaven. Michael.
Rabbi, when we pass,
Yes.
do we ever see our loved ones who passed before us?
So we're going to get to that, and the answer is yes. Okay, on the soul level, which is the real I meeting the real you. Very good question. So in a general sense, that relates to the concept of reincarnation, where the soul comes back multiple times in order to fulfill its mission. Okay? I'm sorry, this is really hard for me to do, but we're going to have to move on. Okay? So I'm going to stay afterwards. So if it's a burning question, I hope it's burning enough for you to stay on with me and ask me after 9 o'clock. Okay? Let's summarize what we learned until now before we move on, okay? And that is that we value life more than anything. We value life more than anything. That's why Jews celebrate life. And death is not the end. It's just a new phase. Death is not the end, it's just a new phase. That's what we learned until now. I want to share with you a story. With the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, okay, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, who passed away in 1950. He spent most of his life in Tsarist Russia, okay, and then communist Russia, where Judaism was essentially outlawed. And he was the leader of the Jewish underground, even though he wasn't so underground himself, of making sure that Judaism continues to thrive in Russia. That's what he did, and he was threatened countless times, and he was almost killed by the authorities for doing this because he was a counter-revolutionary. At one of the many times that he was interrogated, he had understanding the mentality of the KGB, and I know some of you know that I'm using the wrong terminology here, but whatever the terminology is, the NKVD, whatever. Yes, thank you. So they were interrogating him, and the way he dealt with them was always with defiance. He never really cooperated with them. That was just the way he decided to work with them. And one time there was a whole group of them interrogating him, which was very, very intimidating. And they were not making headway with him. So one of them, who was actually a Jewish communist, pulled out a gun, and he said, "Rabbi, this little toy makes many men talk." And he was obviously trying to intimidate the Rebbe into talking. And he says, this little gun has great powers. Under its spell, many mute people became very talkative. And what the previous Rebbe responded to him was that you are quite mistaken. That toy has an effect on those with one world and many gods. We, on the other hand, have one God and two worlds. As such, I don't panic at the sight of your toy. It has no effect on me whatsoever. And he said this calmly. Now, I don't, thank God I don't know. I'm sure some of us, in some way, from whatever experiences you may have had, may know what it means to have a gun held up to you, being held up by a gun. And I've heard people describe to me what it was like to be held up by a gunpoint. And when you're dealing with people who are murdering people every single day, the gun means a whole lot. But to the previous Rebbe, he was not intimidated by it. And here was the reason why. He was not in fear of death. He wasn't in fear of death. If that's where God's going to take my soul now, so God's going to take my soul now. But I'm not going to live in fear of that because I know that my soul is going to a new phase. But it's not something that I'm going to be scared of. The Rebbe wanted to live. There's no question that he wanted to live. But this was what he felt was the proper way to deal with the authorities. And in fact, it worked, and he survived. He ended up coming to America. The main point is that the Jewish perspective precludes thanatophobia, the big fancy word which means fear of death. Judaism precludes fear of death. We, at least, and I'm not going to say this is easy, but based on Judaism, we, in theory, should not be in fear of death. Okay, that may take time for us to absorb, but the more we think about this, the more we should not be in fear of death. Now, I'm going to bring up, and here's the quote from their previous Rebbe, we have one God in two worlds. As such, I don't panic at the sight of your toy. It has no effect on me whatsoever. Very powerful words. I'm going to mention one other point which relates very much to why we should not fear death. Okay? This is a very complex philosophical point. Okay? There are going to be a lot of questions about this. I'm going to ask you to email me your questions, and I will try and email to everyone the responses to the questions that I get. okay? Because I know there are going to be a bunch of questions. But I want to tell you this, okay? I want to tell you something about learning, okay? I want to tell you something about learning. The more a concept challenges you, the more opportunity that potentially lies in that concept, okay? The more resistant you are to a concept, I know this may sound a little cultish, but I mean this seriously because I found this myself, and I hope you understand what I'm saying. I'm not trying to sway your minds to believe something. I'm sharing with you our heritage, okay? Not some outside thing. But I know this concept is going to be a little bit challenging, and that's fine. But don't drop it at the face of it. Think about it thoroughly, because this concept happens to offer tremendous meaning in life and can assist us in very trying and difficult situations. Okay? With that, did I get your attention now? Okay. With that, here's what I want to tell you. There's a verse in text 12a. Let's read text 12a. So King Solomon wrote that everything has an appointed time. There's a time to be born and a time to die. Let's read the Midrash on that verse. Here's what Judaism teaches us, that everyone's life has a destiny. That means that God decides exactly how long every single one of us is going to live. Okay? It's not in our control. It's not in our control. I know that alone raises a whole bunch of questions. I know. And I'm going to try and answer some of them, and I'm going to ask you to also think about possibilities that you never considered before, okay? Death cannot be prematurely imposed on a person, even by illness or by accident, if it is not their time to go. Okay? Let's read text 13. I know the question. I know. Okay, text 13. I'm going to do my best to explain this briefly. Okay? I attempted to do this in a different class where it was not part of the class, and so I know the challenges with it. We're going to do our best with it. Okay? Everything that happens in the world is by the and alongside with the will of God. So in other words, when someone passes away, that is an indication that that is the time for that person's life to end. We have an obligation to take care of our life, to take care of ourselves, to live healthy lives. If I do anything that's detrimental to my life, to my well-being, which I do, I don't think in great significant ways, but we all do in some small ways, we have responsibility for that. God, we are responsible for that. And every time we do not care for ourselves appropriately, that affects our ability of functioning in this world. But it cannot end our life prematurely. Okay? God may have known this soul we're going to put into a guy whose destiny is that they're not going to take care of themselves and they're going to whatever. You know, that's all good, but it's all part of the person's destiny. There are rare exceptions that we're taught when a person, through prayer or otherwise, which is why we pray, where we can influence for the positive or, God forbid, for the negative, that someone does die in very extreme situations where someone will die earlier than their destiny, or someone's life will be extended. But generally speaking, our lives are destined. The length of our lives are destined. We don't do things so that we will live longer. We try and maximize the time that God is giving us. It doesn't take away from our freedom of choice to do all of the things that God gives us choice to do. Okay? Now I want to say one other point here. I know this is a very important point, especially for some of us in the room. And I know what I'm talking about is very sensitive. So, when someone, God forbid, dies at the hands of someone else, the fact that this person died at their destined time does not exempt the person who committed the murder at all, because every human being is responsible for their actions. And therefore, even though when something bad may happen to me in my life, such as someone deciding to take a baseball bat, and I'm going to trivialize this a little bit so it's not as intense. Someone takes their baseball bat and smashes my mailbox. I happen not to have a mailbox. But smashes my mailbox, right? And I wake up in the morning, oh my gosh, right? Whatever it is. And the damage is whatever it is, $100, okay? So that was $100, right? That happened to me because God wanted that to happen to me. Had God not wanted that to happen to me, it would not have happened to me with all of the intentions anyone may have. However, when it happens to me, the perpetrator is fully responsible for choosing to be the agent of evil. And we bring them to court, and we try them if it's something that we can bring them to court about and try them, and if not, it's something that God tries them from heaven with. So it does not exempt anyone, but our life is the length that God gives us. Why am I mentioning this, even though it's such a challenging thought? I mention this because this can be very, very meaningful when we deal with the passing. Okay? It can be very, very meaningful when we deal with the passing if you give it enough thought and you open yourself up to it. It can really change the way we experience a passing. This is not what makes it true that it can be meaningful. It just happens to be it could be very meaningful. Number two, I'm sharing it because I'm trying to bring out a major point here, and that is the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe teaches us, don't fear death because Jews don't fear death. It's just a new phase of life. Number two, a death is destined. So therefore, there's no reason to fear that if I do this, it may bring an end to everything because our time is destined. Okay? If you have questions about this, I'm going to ask you to email me or stay after the class because it will not let us end once we go down this road. I know it's a major, major subject. I consider myself to be a thoughtful person, okay? Let me know if you think I'm not. But I consider myself to be a thoughtful person, I'm not a blind faith person, and Judaism is not a blind faith religion. I've thought about this for a long time, and while there are many questions that need to be discussed, it's not something to be quickly dismissed. That's the extent that I'm going to say about this, okay? So in conclusion, as we draw to the conclusion of today's lesson, okay, I want to bring out perhaps the most important point of tonight's lesson, and that is text number 14. Let's read text 14. We have a statement here that tzaddikim, righteous people, are considered alive even after their demise. Well, what does that say about, I'm going to say, what does it say about me? Right? Well, very nice for tzaddikim, for righteous people. What does it say about someone who's not righteous? Are they not considered to be alive even after their demise? And didn't we just discuss how the real I, my soul, lives on? It's just a new phase without a body in heaven. So what does that mean that tzaddikim live on, but it sounds like perhaps I don't live on or others don't live on? So here's what we need to understand. The body eventually fades away and returns to dust. The soul is eternity, and therefore it's going to live on. What about feelings, our thoughts, and our behaviors? And here's what we need to understand. That there are feeling, thoughts, and behaviors that will die, and there are feeling, thoughts, and behaviors that will live on. When our feelings, thoughts, and behaviors are part of our eternal soul and the direction of the eternal soul, then those thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are eternal. And a righteous person's thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are soul-directed and soul-oriented, and therefore they are eternal. And therefore their entire life, the way they experienced life in this world, actually continues. Nothing really changes other than the fact that they don't have this tool called the body. But the exact way they functioned in this world continues on because they were completely soul-oriented. You can call that purpose-oriented, you can call that God-oriented, mission-oriented, however you want to term it, it's really all the same thing that I'm saying. However, when we spend our lives pursuing money, physical luxuries, honor, and fame, which I'm sure no one does in their entirety over here, but to some extent we probably all do. But let's just assume someone who does that with their entire life, and we know if you read enough tabloids, you know that there are enough people out there doing that, right? Their life comes to a crashing halt. It dies. Now, their soul, of course, continues, but their life as they lived it in this world ends because everything that they lived for is no longer. It is no longer. And what this teaches us is a very powerful lesson, and that is that we need to the best of our ability, focus our lives on soul-oriented things, because the more we do that, the more our life just continues into a different phase as opposed to coming to a crashing halt. Let's watch a video over here, everybody. I'm just going to skip a slide. Here we go.
Why wait to celebrate? Bright lights in city streets.
Eighth Day is a popular Hasidic rock band.
Why wait to celebrate?
One of their hits was inspired by a powerful episode in the life of the second leader of the Hasidic movement, Rabbi Dovber of Mezerich.
A student goes to visit a sage, and the sage has nothing in his house. And he says, "Where's your couches? Where's your chandelier?" And he says back to the student, "Where's all your stuff? You just have a suitcase." And the student responds, "But I'm just passing through." And that's when the sage says, "Aha, I'm just like you. I'm also just passing through."
To his student's assertion, Rabbi Dovber responded with a transformative insight.
That's when he said, I'm just like you. I'm just passing through, just like you. My heart wants to feel something that's real, and my mind hopes to find treasures of another kind. And if you had my eyes, you'd see a palace for you and me.
This world is temporary, where people spend most of their life collecting stuff. And the sage tells them, "I'm actually just like you. I also collect stuff. It's just not that type of stuff, not leather couches and chandeliers. I collect treasures of another kind." He stays focused on that higher goal.
Rabbi Dovber taught his students that this world's glitter is a distraction that expires when the journey of corporeality chugs to an abrupt end. Better to invest in treasures of a kind that will benefit the soul in its eternal destination.
I'm just like you. I'm just passing through, just like you. My heart wants to feel something that's real, and my mind hopes to find treasures of another kind. And if you had my eyes, you'd see a palace for you and me. And my heart wants to feel something that's real, and my mind hopes to find treasures of another kind. And if you had my eyes, you'd see a palace for you and me. A palace for you and me.
But they're singing something very powerful, and that is that every one of us, I know this to be true for every one of us, if we can get ourselves in that moment of truth and vulnerability. Every one of us wants to feel something that's real. That's really what we are seeking. Every shot of vodka is someone seeking to feel something that's real. That's really what it is, by the way. That's what it is. The problem is the vodka takes you somewhere else. That's the problem. But that's really what every single person is seeking, to experience something that's real. And here's the point. Life, as Judaism defines it, is not what happens between when we're born and when we die. Life is when we do things which are real. And those real things are eternal. And the more our lives are based on eternal things, the more we are eternal. Our life continues. We do not die. That's the reason why the Talmud tells us that there are people who in their life are dead. What do you mean in their life they're dead? They're living. We're not talking about physical life. We're talking about their real life. Their life is about dead things. And so when their body dies, their entire life dies because it was dedicated to deadness. And then there are people who in their death are alive. And that's because their entire living in the body was the same focus as their living after their soul, even without a body. That's what's so powerful. And the Torah tells us, as it does in text 16, that God tells us, choose life. Right? You ever hear that term? Choose life. Does God need to tell a person to choose life? I mean, who's not choosing life? Unless someone, God forbid, is unwell, of course we choose life. We do everything possible to preserve our life. God's not telling us to choose life as in to sustain your physical life. God is saying, choose eternal things. Find things which are real. Don't settle for substitutions, because they're just numbing you from what you're really looking for. That is what life is, and that's why death is really a phase of life from the body to a phase of life without the body. It's just a transition. And this is, in my opinion, very, very powerful. I want to conclude. I'm sorry, I'm not going to be taking any questions tonight. I want to conclude, just skipping through here we go. Okay. I want to conclude by telling you two things in conclusion and asking you to do something which can be very meaningful to the extent that you're willing to put yourself into it. Okay? So in conclusion, if death scares us, then we need to contemplate the eternity of our soul. If we're scared of death, remember we are eternal. We never die. The real me never dies. And number two, if you're scared of the end, you're scared that things are going to end, spend more of your life doing things which are eternal. Spend more of your life doing things which are real. And then it never ends. It just continues because nothing really changes. See, here's what I'm going to ask you to do. I want the ones and the twos, if there's a three attached, joined together as well. This is really important, and this can be very, very valuable for you, okay? So I am requesting of you, a personal request. I'm requesting of this for you, not for me. I'm requesting this for you. Do this for yourself, please. Okay? I'm going to ask you 4 questions. I want everyone actually on your own to take a pen. I hope you brought one with you and write down an answer. You will not have to share this with anyone other than your partner. And if you really don't want to share it with them, don't share it with them either. But hopefully you'll share it just with your partner. So this is purely confidential. Okay? Question number 1. What's your social security number? No, just kidding. Question number 1 is, from 1 being the lowest to 10 being the highest, what number would describe how much of your life is based on eternal things? Give it a number. Like, how much of your life is based on eternal things? Would you say that 5, 50%? Would you say 2? Would you say a 9? However you define things which are godly, goodly, the right thing that a Jew should be doing. Okay? We're not going to define that. And it's no right or wrong. Just give it a number. You have 7 seconds. Give it a number. Just whatever comes to your mind, put it down. Give it a number. Don't be scared to write the number down. And if you are, just realize how scared you are of writing a number down. This is going to be tremendous for you. I'm telling you, it's going to be tremendous. Write down a number. Okay, question number two. How would your life look differently? Use one sentence for this. How would your life look different if you were to increase eternal things in your life? How would your life look different? How would your life be enhanced if your life was, in theory, let's say you were the fantasy person of eternal things, of being focused on eternal things, which you can't, let's say you can't, it's not practical, but in fantasy. How would your life look different? Would say, oh, I'd be a much happier person. I'd be a much more motivated person. I'd bring more joy into my home. I don't know. I'm making it up. But you write your thing. Do it for yourself. Until you do this, you're just an observer. Now you're engaging with yourself. Question number three is, what is holding you back from effecting this change? It can be the most legitimate reason. It can be Mount Everest, which can't be moved, and that's fine. It can be the most legitimate thing. It's not a question of legitimacy. Just identify what it is that's in your way. Okay? What is it that's holding you back? Maybe you're lazy. Maybe the circumstances of your life just don't permit it. Maybe you have to work 18 hours a day. You just don't have time for eternity. Too busy trying to make a few dollars to buy a burger. I don't know. It really makes no difference. Just write down what is holding you back from effecting this change. If there's anyone here that really objects to what I'm doing now, please send me an email and let me know. Okay? But otherwise, I want to tell you, I'm really doing this for everyone in the room. This is not really a part of the official part of the course. I'm doing this for you, and I want you to know something. If you're having trouble answering these questions, which I'm sure many of us are having, that is fantastic. That's fantastic. You're really thinking about yourself, and you're struggling with it. Don't let go of that, because you got to take yourself more seriously. You deserve it. So we have to take ourselves more seriously. Number 4, what small piece of advice can you give yourself to take one small step towards implementing this change? Just a small piece of advice to do one small thing. What's one small piece of advice you can give yourself? I'm not talking about changing, again, I'm not talking about moving Mount Everest. A small thing that you can do in order to implement change. Okay? Small thing. It can be here's an idea, okay? It can be going to the bank tomorrow, taking $20 and saying, I need $20 in nickels. Okay? How many nickels do you get for $20? 400? 4,000? How many, what? 400, right? I was getting a funny look. Is it 400? Whatever it is. I know Jews, we're going to have an argument about this, right? It's a mathematical thing. So anyway, what is it? It's 20 times 20, isn't it? 400, all right. I'm only half insane. So 400, right? And then every single day you tell us, so look, I'm going to do something. You know what? I'm going to do something. Every single day I'm going to take a nickel, except for Shabbos and Yom Tov. And every single day, you never knew rabbis don't collect money on certain days. There are actually certain days rabbis don't collect money. And every single day you take a nickel, and you're going to put it into the charity box of your choice. Every single day. You wake up in the morning, you have your coffee, nickel, clink. That's it. That's a small piece of advice you can give yourself. I'm just making this up, but you can come up with 1,000 things. Okay? And then you have more eternity in your life. That's amazing. Now, if you're radical about this, this is what you're going to do. You're gonna get the cell phone number of the person sitting next to you if they're willing to share it, okay? And you're gonna text them this week on Tuesday, that's tomorrow, on Thursday, and on Sunday about what you did for your eternity. What eternal choice you made on those 3 days, okay? That's if you're radical, okay? But my friends, guaranteed the people who take the numbers and do that are the ones who are going to be seeing change in their life. But thank you for joining tonight. I hope to see you back next week. You'll be receiving an email from me. Have a wonderful rest of the week. I'm here till 10:30.